is providing simultaneous translation in Spanish so that this presentation will be available to our Spanish-speaking brothers and sisters. This series is being recorded and links to the recording will be available. So if you do not receive a link to the recording by a week from today, please email me and I'll put my email address in the chat box, but email me at cdangelo@scny.org and I'll send you the link. So Terry, we welcome you. And thank you for offering to do this 3-part series, The Company of Charity in the Community of Earth. Many of us know Terry, Father Terrence Moran, as Director of the Office of Peace, Justice, and Ecological Integrity for the Sisters of Charity of St. Elizabeth. Terry needs no introduction to those of us in the Company of Charity. However, as we begin, I do want to say how grateful I am to you, Terry, and the many ways you bring life to the charism of charity, and specifically for this series, where you will help us to go deeper into the charism of charity through the lens of the new cosmology. So as we begin, and I hand this over to Terry, I just invite all of us to take a moment to pause and to be in touch with the energy of love deep within and among us, and circling and pulsating through us in all life. This love will make the symbol sing again in our hearts, lives, and all creation. So thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Carol. And thanks to all of you for joining on this Feast of the Immaculate Conception, a very important day for sisters in the Federation of the Sisters of Charity. And I'll say a little bit more about that at the end. So as Carol said, this is the first of a 3-part series. And the theme of today's presentation is to make the symbol sing again. And this is an idea that I got really from 2 places. First of all, from Sister Mary Marr, who used to be the Superior General of the School Sisters of Notre Dame, the community that had the great fortune to educate me in Danbury, Connecticut. And Mary Marr, in a talk once, said that a religious charism is like that Buddhist meditation bell that we're all familiar with, that we can see on the screen. She compared the needs of the world to the mallet that strikes the bell. Only when the bell, the charism, is struck by the needs of the world does it make a beautiful sound. And I think that's particularly true of our Vincentian charism. The Vincentian charism from the beginning was a gift that allowed itself to be struck by the needs of the world. And through the long history and the diverse history of that charism, different sounds, different music has been evoked from the charism because of the needs of the world that struck it. So we're going to be looking today at different ways in which the new cosmology, the new universe story, whatever you want to call it, evokes something new out of our charism if we allow the charism to be struck by it, if we allow the charism to sing again in this new way. This specific phrase comes from the great theologian, one of the greatest theologians of our age, Elizabeth Johnson. And she speaks specifically about the Trinity that we're going to be looking at in a minute. She says we need to let the symbol sing again. We're going to be looking at some truths of our faith as we were taught about them in the Catechism, things that we believed in since we were children, but very often have become kind of tired and stale for us because the symbol doesn't seem to have any more power. And I'm going to suggest again that when these basic symbols of our faith interact with the new universe story, They make beautiful music again. They become alive for us in a way that perhaps they haven't been in a long time. So we're going to let the cymbal sing again. One stream that stays constant, for example, in the constitutions of all the congregations in the Charity Federation, are these words that St. Vincent de Paul gave in the first common rules for the Daughters of Charity. He says, the principal end for which God called and established the Daughters of Charity is to honor our Lord Jesus Christ as the source and model of all charity, serving him corporally and spiritually in the person of the poor, children, the needy, the sick, the imprisoned, or others who through shame dare not make known their wants. Some version of those words appear in the New York Constitutions and in the Sisters of Charity St. Elizabeth Constitutions, I think in pretty much every community in the Federation. Vincent makes very clear that this charism that we claim is something that is at one time profoundly contemplative and profoundly active. Although, frankly speaking, in our tradition, we've kind of erred more on the side of action. You're probably all familiar with the Irish theologian Dermot O'Murcú. I heard him say in a talk once, there are three kinds of women religious in the church: contemplative, active, and hyperactive, the Sisters of Charity. And you're all laughing, I think, because it certainly resonates with your experience. So when we talk about things like the charism of charity, the demands of charity, when you read the rhetoric of Vincent and Louise and Elizabeth Seton, it can seem very exhausting. The New Jersey Charities, the title of their constitutions is Toward Boundless Charity. And I always say, if there's anything more inclined to lead somebody into burnout, is to call them to boundless anything, boundaryless charity. That's a really, really mighty ambition for any human being to commit herself to. And it can become very exhausting, except if we look at this boundless charity, not as something that we have to try to muster in ourselves, but rather as the deepest energy of the universe in which we are invited to share. I think to the contrary, we often exhaust ourselves by swimming upstream, as it were, by swimming against the energy of the universe. When we're carried by this deepest energy, we don't exhaust ourselves. When we swim against it, we're going against the grain of the universe, and we're going against, therefore, our own truest nature. And unfortunately, that's what humanity has been doing, certainly since the Industrial Revolution, in the alienation culturally that we experience between human beings and what we call the environment, creation, as if we're not a part of it, as if we're not intimately related with it. So I'm going to invite us not to exhaust ourselves by an impossible goal, but rather to align ourselves with the deepest energy in the universe and to be carried along in its beautiful, powerful waves. So we're going to look at, as I said, some of the prime symbols of our religious traditions and the new energy we can find in them by letting the bell, the mallet of the new cosmology strike that bell. The first is, let me, to conclude just what I was saying now, this beautiful quote from Teilhard de Chardin. He says, love is the most universal, the most tremendous, and the most mystical of cosmic forces. So you could say that then about the charism of charity. The charism of charity is the primal and universal psychic energy. Love is a sacred reserve of energy. It is like the blood of spiritual evolution. Love is an adventure and a conquest. It survives and develops like the universe itself. itself. Only by perpetual discovery, love alone is capable of uniting living beings in such a way as to complete and fulfill them. For it alone takes them and joins them by what is deepest in themselves. Love is the infinity which links and draws together the elements of the world. Love, in fact, is the agent of universal synthesis. What a stunning evocation of the charism of charity. And we could say the Sisters of Charity and their associates and their partners in mission are agents of the universal synthesis. Our charism links us profoundly with the deepest energies of the universe. I think many of us remember this drawing of the Trinity when we were kids studying the Catechism. And unfortunately, it made the Trinity look like a very complicated geometry problem. Circles and arrows and diagrams and lines. Karl Rahner very famously said once that if the Pope said tomorrow there were 4 persons in the Trinity or 2 persons in the Trinity, Catholics would say, oh, fine, and it wouldn't make a bit of difference. Unfortunately, for most believers, the Trinity seems to be, as I said, an impossibly abstract geometry problem that has no real relevance to the way we live our following of Jesus. One of the wonderful things about the new cosmology, I think, is how it can make the symbol of the Trinity sing again. It gives us new information about the nature of reality, and therefore about the creator of that reality. The new cosmology tells us, for example, that everything is connected, that relationship is the part of the very essence of existence. Nothing exists except in relation to everything else. So there's relationship in the very nature of God. God doesn't choose to be in relationship with some and not with others. God, by nature, by essence, is relationship. And so when we imagine we're not in relationship with people or with dolphins or with rocks or with the soil, as I said, we're swimming against the stream of reality, and we're making ourselves miserable, and we make the world an object of our destruction rather than our relationship. The Trinity also shows us that diversity is not opposed to unity. In the Trinity, we have persons that are completely diverse and completely united. And the universe as well reflects God in that way. The universe is incredibly diverse and also essentially and intimately united. So the two things that look like opposition, has anybody ever told you, why do you have to be so different? We have to be different because we are different. But difference is not an obstacle to unity. It's rather a condition of unity. Further, the New Universe story tells us that unlike the biblical story we learned, that there were 7 days of creation, and on the 6th day we appeared, and the story started to get interesting. The universe story turns that inside out and reminds us that in reality, we have existed for the thinnest filament of time in the 13.8 billion years of the universe. So the story didn't get started when we showed up. There has been a word of God uttered into creation from the first moment to the present, to which we have to attend very, very deeply. And we are so blessed that we are the first generation in the history of humanity that knows something about that story in a scientific way. And therefore, we're the first generation in humanity that can know more about God than the authors of the Bible. That's shocking, but it's true. Finally, in the church, we tend to put a lot of emphasis on tradition. We look to the meaning of something in its origins. So what did we do in the beginning? And also in religious life, we look back to the founding days for our charism. The new cosmology tells us the universe is still unfolding, and the true meaning of anything is only revealed in the end. So it is by moving and acting towards the future that we discover who we are, not merely by looking at who we said we were or what we looked like in the early days in the past. So we'll look for a few minutes now, more specifically at the Trinity, in particular by a beautiful image that comes from the greatest of Russian iconographers, a monk named Andrei Rublev, who was born around the year 1360, they're not sure, and died in 1427 or 30. They're not sure about his exact dates. Rublev lived in a period of Russian history that isn't much different from Russian history now, where Russia was a loose confederation of warring principalities. So the life of the ordinary person was being cannon fodder for these princes and barons that were constantly fighting with each other to gain territory. He also lived just immediately before the time of the great European colonization of the Americas, a time that unleashed the greatest history of violence that the world has known. So in this very chaotic time, in this violent time, it would be no surprise if theologians and bishops and religious people, when they tried to come up with an image of God, they came up with an image of God as the biggest king of all, as the guy who had the biggest stick, and he was always a guy, who was able to club this fractious, fighting, chaotic group into submission. We are all familiar, I think, those of us who live in the United States, with this image, which is the dome of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington. This is an image of Jesus called the Pantocrator, the ruler of all. And if you look at Jesus, that's certainly not somebody you're going to want to meet on Judgment Day. Jesus looks mad. Look at his face. And he literally has lightning bolts, fire, coming out of his ears. He works out a lot. He's got big muscles, big abs, big pecs, big biceps. He's majestic. He's putting his hands up. He's here to lay down orders. He dwarfs the people who are at his feet and only at his feet. Again, it's an understandable human tendency to take our own violence and to project that onto God. God is the most powerful guy of all who can whip us into shape. It is amazing that in the midst of this violent culture, Rublev doesn't do that. He doesn't project the image of violence onto God. Rather, he came up with this incredibly beautiful and peaceful and profound image of God in his icon of the Trinity. You're probably familiar with it. It's one of the most famous religious images of the world, in which he takes a story from Genesis 18 of Abraham welcoming three angelic visitors. And he finds out at the end that he is welcomed, as Genesis says, angels unaware. And Rublev goes further. He says these three angelic visitors to Abraham and Sarah were rather the figures of the Trinity itself. Interestingly, God is coming, Rublev says, not as the big bully with the club, but as three wanderers, three strangers, tired, thirsty, looking for a welcome at the table of human hospitality. All the communities in our charism, kind of as an aside, are working in a special way to welcome the stranger, the immigrant, the refugee, the migrant. That is a very, very Trinitarian activity because God comes to us in the tired, weary, thirsty, exhausted traveler looking for a welcome. To briefly review some of the symbolism that Rublev uses in this image, the Father in the Trinity is the figure on the left. The Father is the invisible and ineffable source of life. No one has ever seen the Father, so Rublev paints him in these muted earth tones so that the Father almost disappears into the background of the icon. The Father looks with a gaze of incredible tenderness and mutuality towards the figure in the center, who is the Word that becomes flesh in Jesus. This figure is dressed in blue and red, reminding us that the Word became flesh. Blue, the color of the heavens, the color of divinity; red, the color of clay, of earth, of blood, of humanity. And you'll notice the fingers of the Word are extended in a gesture of blessing. That's the way the priest in the Eastern liturgy shapes his hand when he blesses. So in the Word, God is saying how richly blessed is the created universe in this Word made flesh, in whom heaven and earth are wed. The third figure, obviously, is the Spirit. And the Spirit is dressed in green because the Spirit is the color of springtime, of growth, of vitality. The Spirit is the greening energy of God. And the Spirit, while deeply present to the others at the table, you notice the Spirit is looking outward and downward. In the Spirit, the divine energy searches the cosmos for people and places that are in need of greening power, of the flourishing of life wherever it is threatened or diminished. Rublev so beautifully images a God in whom there is individuality and unity, in which there's mutuality, conversation, relationship, and no competition. There is no hierarchy in this Trinity. There is no boss. The energy is not the geometry triangle. The energy is this circle, this tidal wave of energy that pervades the universe, as Teilhard said to us at the beginning. Just like the flourishing of each person in the Trinity ensures the flourishing of the others, so the flourishing of each being in creation is a condition for the flourishing of the others. Again, when we were kids studying the catechism, we learned that we shared the image and likeness of God because of intellect and will. We were taught to look inside of ourselves for where the image of God was. Rublev says to discover our relationship to God, we don't look inside, we look outside. We are like God in our capacity for relationship. So the more that we are in relationships of mutual independence, interdependence with all of creation, the more the image of God shines resplendent in us. So when we get together, like today, or when we gather as New York and New Jersey are going to do in an assembly in April, we're not just enjoying each other's company and talking. What we're doing is what the Spirit is doing. We are training our gaze to the world and seeing where the world needs greening power, where the world needs the fire of the charism of charity, and how we can follow our gaze to act in those places. Rublev says the subject of the conversation is in the middle of that round table. It's the cup of the Eucharist. It's the chalice of the Eucharist. And inside the Eucharist is the Paschal Lamb, inside the cup rather. So what God is talking about all the time is nourishment, is those corporal and spiritual works of mercy that Vincent gave to us. feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, the abundance of the abundant flourishing of life. So Rublev says creation is at its heart Eucharistic. Every being says to every other being, this is my body, take and eat. This is my blood, take and drink. And we'll look a little bit more about that in a moment when we talk about Eucharist. There was a wonderful theologian, Catherine Maury-Lukunga, at Notre Dame, who died very young of cancer. And she wrote very beautifully, God is essentially relational, ecstatic, fecund, fertile, alive as passionate love. So we can say then, to be a human being is to be essentially relational, ecstatic, fertile, alive as passionate love. To be in the company of charity is to be a relational, ecstatic, fertile, alive as passionate love. The American poet, Emily Dickinson, put it in another way that we can all practice. She suggested when we make the sign of the cross, instead of saying in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, she suggests, and I invite us to do that now, in the name of the bee and of the butterfly and of the breeze. Amen. That's not to deny the Trinity, of course, but Emily points out to us, if we have faith in the Trinity, we also have faith in our connection to the bee, the butterfly, and the breeze. And I suggest that this is the connection, this is the relationship we need so desperately to recapture. I'd like to conclude this part of the talk by this very, very beautiful poem by an African-American poet, Everett Hoagland. And the name of his poem is Invocation. And I think he sums up very beautifully everything I've been trying to say. He says about God, architect of icebergs, snowflakes, crystals, rainbows, sand grains, dust motes, atoms. Mason whose tools are glaciers, rain, rivers, ocean. Chemist who made blood of seawater, bone of minerals in stone, milk of love. Whatever you are, I know this, spinner, you are everywhere, in the all ever-changing above, whirling around us. Yes, in the loose strands, in the rough wave of the common cloth, threaded with our DNA, on hubbed, spoked, spinning wheel that is this world, this solar system, galaxy, universe. Help us to see ourselves in all creation, and all creation in ourselves, ourselves in one another. Remind those of us who like connections made with similes, metaphors, and symbols. Symbols all of us are. Everything is already connected. Remind us, as oceans go, so we go. As the air goes, so go we. As other life forms on Earth go, so go we. As our planet goes, so go we. Great poet, who inspired in the beginning was the Word. Edit our thoughts, so our ethics are our politics, and our actions, the afterlives of our words. Isn't that beautiful? And that's exactly what we need to do. An Orthodox theologian put it another way. He said, our politics are the Trinity. We need to make our politics what we've just reflected on in the Trinity. To look now for a moment at another great truth of our faith, the incarnation. I offer for your reflection this very beautiful statue at a church of St. Martin of the Fields in London. And in the year 2000, when we celebrated the 2000th anniversary of the Incarnation, as it were, the church commissioned an artist to carve a statue of the Incarnation. And you'll see at the bottom of this slab of stone, he has the two scripture quotes, lived among us and in the beginning. So the sculptor brilliantly draws the child Jesus, not popping into the world, but coming out of the world. How often when a child is being born, we say they're coming into the world. They're not coming into the world from someplace else. We all come out of the world. We all come out of earth. And the child is arising out of earth, and you can see the umbilical cord connecting the child to the earth. This statue reminds us that the flesh taking of God did not start on March 25th, year one, when Jesus took flesh in the womb of Mary, according to our liturgical measuring. The incarnation took place at the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago. There was never a moment in the existence of the universe when the incarnation wasn't happening, because at that moment, all the hydrogen atoms that were going to form Jesus of Nazareth were born. In the explosion of stars, all of the other heavy elements that were going to form the flesh and blood of Jesus of Nazareth were born. The flesh taking of God was in process from the first moments of creation. So our tradition of the incarnation reminds us that creation is not in competition with God. I'm sure many of us who are older in religious life, which those of us who are religious on this are, we might remember a time in our formation when, quote unquote, the world was seen to be a distraction, for example, to our life of prayer. When we prayed, we closed our eyes to dim our senses, to shut out everything outside. How absurd. Because the very flesh taking of God is going on, the incarnation is going on at every minute in the stuff of creation. Creation is not in competition with God, but rather it's the principal way in which God is experienced. And therefore, abuse of creation is not just an ecologically bad thing to do. It's a sacrilege. It's a violation of a sacred thing. When we compromise the cleanness of water, the pureness of wheat, of grapes, of olives, we pollute the air with which we draw breath to praise God in word and in song. So our actions to care for creation are not merely trendy or politically correct. They are liturgical. They are the most profound liturgical gesture that we engage in. This is an idea that just doesn't come from a lefty like myself. It comes from Pope Benedict. So this will lead into our looking at our sacramental imagination as Catholics. Pope Benedict says, the liturgy is not something alongside the reality of the world. It's not an activity we carve out for an hour on Sunday. The world itself shall become a living host, a liturgy. This is also the great vision of Teilhard de Chardin. In the end, we shall achieve a true cosmic liturgy, where the cosmos becomes a living host. That's from a talk of Pope Benedict in 2009. So Benedict tells us, as Teilhard said, the Mass, don't take me the wrong way, the Mass is not the most important thing. The Mass is leading us to that cosmic liturgy, to that end moment when the entire cosmos becomes a living host. That's why we go to liturgy. That's why we do anything. to unite our energy with the energy of our creative God, working towards that moment when the cosmos becomes a living host. You're all familiar with Elizabeth Seton's great love of the Eucharist and how it was primarily the Eucharist that led her to become a Catholic. And you know, again and again, I hear people who are disgusted with the institutional church say, the thing that keeps me in the church is the Eucharist. And that came up again and again in the listening sessions that the Synod held. So many people say that. The great Dorothy Day said, you know, as a convert, I never saw the institutional church as anything but corrupt. What keeps me in the church is that it gives me the Eucharist. So this is, again, a very, very deep sentiment among the holiest people in our tradition. On the left there, you see an image of the Last Supper, the Eucharist, that belonged to Elizabeth Seton. And one of the moments in her conversion was when, during her time in Italy, she was in a church during Eucharistic adoration, and she heard a British tourist kind of make fun of these, you know, ignorant peasant Catholics who are worshiping a cookie, as you sometimes hear people say. Elizabeth said, "My very heart trembled with shame and sorrow for this unfeeling interruption of their sacred adoration. I thought secretly on the words of St. Paul with tears. They discern not the Lord's body." So it pained Elizabeth that people could not see the body of God in the Eucharist. I think Elizabeth would turn to us with sorrow and with tears because we do not discern the body of God in the universe, in God's first words, in God's first body. The first time God said, "This is my body, this is my blood," was at the Big Bang. So Elizabeth would look at us with those same tears and shame and sorrow for the ways in which we perhaps find it easy to see God in the Eucharist, but not in the flesh and blood of earth and sea and air and animals and brother and sister creatures. You've probably seen this beautiful altar in the White House, the first House of Charity in Emmitsburg. And the altar was designed by Elizabeth herself. And if you look at there's obviously the tabernacle and the base of the altar, that outline is supposed to be the crib of Bethlehem. Interestingly, Elizabeth herself draws that link between Eucharist and incarnation. The God who took flesh in a feed box, in a box that feeds animals. The God who says to the universe is my body, the universe is my blood. Take and eat, and give yourself as well to be eaten by others, to be food, to be nourishment for others. So it's extraordinary that in a symbolic way, Elizabeth made that same connection. As we heard earlier on, Teilhard says, Christ has a cosmic body that extends throughout the universe. And we have to learn how to adore at that cosmic body, not just at the body in the tabernacle, not just the body in our neighbor, but the cosmic body that extends throughout the universe. You know, our bishops are promoting this Eucharistic revival that's going to be characterized by processions and by Eucharistic adoration. And that's not necessarily bad. But would that they had captured some of this wisdom of Teilhard and of Pope Benedict. I think most Catholics need to learn more about the presence of God in the cosmic body of the universe. In that quote that we heard from Vincent at the beginning, he talks about those corporal works of mercy. Our charism is very bodily oriented. And again, we need to see the charism, not just in terms of the bodies of the sick and the poor and the undereducated and the immigrant, but in the body of endangered species, in the body of polluted water, in the body of polluted air, in that cosmic body of the whole Eucharist. There's a poem by a great eco poet, a friend of Thomas Berry and of Brian Swin, Drew Dellinger. And the poem is called Hieroglyphic Stairway. And this is a few words from it. He says, it's 3:23 in the morning and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren asked me in dreams, what did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing. Surely you did something as the mammals, reptiles, and birds were all dying. Surely you did something. Did you fill the streets with protests when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew? So this beautiful music that the new cosmology brings about out of our charism also asks us that challenging question. What did we do once we knew? Some of you may have seen the beautiful movie, I recommend it to you if you haven't seen it, called Chasing Ice, about a National Geographic photographer, James Ballard, who went to record every year the melting of the glaciers in Antarctica. And by the end of the story, he has broken his legs, or maybe he even had some disease that affected his walking. But he went on crutches to continue his photographing, his witnessing the melting of the glaciers at great expense to himself. So that's an example of what somebody did once he knew. Because he said before he was assigned this photographic assignment by National Geographic, he was not a particularly awakened ecologist. And he dismissed, those crazy tree huggers. But once he saw, like Thomas, putting his hands in the wounds, once he saw the wounds of the earth, he went to great physical sacrifice to give witness, with great sacrifice and with tremendous passion. So we in the company of charity, what will we do now that we know? Will boundless charity embrace earth? So on this day, it's also the patronal feast day of my congregation. On this day, when you traditionally renew your vows, renew not just your vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but renew your vow to do something now that you know. Vincent, Louise, Elizabeth, our brothers and sisters who went before us, all the creatures to which we are interrelated, ask us to renew our vow. Now that we know, what do we do? So that's that. So now we have some time for sharing about how maybe something I shared or something that popped up in your mind struck your bell and brings out some new music in you.
And I just want to, well, Terry, thank you. I just want to say I did mute people. So if anyone does want to say something, you're going to have to unmute yourself. Okay. And if you know how to raise your hand, since at least I see that people are on more than one page, we don't see. So,
It's probably a small enough group, Carol, that you can unmute them and all.
okay, you want me to unmute them?
Yeah,
Oh,
unless it
okay.
becomes a problem. If we have some, background noise, we can.
Okay, I don't know if I can, I have to ask them to unmute. So they
Oh,
have,
okay, yeah, you can mute them, but you can't unmute them. That's a symbol. Okay, so you know how to unmute yourself. Margaret, I think, has her hand up. O'Brien. Oh, no, you have something yellow on your bookshelf that looks like a raised hand.
we'll give us ourselves a little bit of time to let it sink in. Terry, and I see Claire. Thank you, Claire. Terry, it was just very good. So Claire?
Yeah, just thanks, Terry. I mean, you brought such life to the deep ethics in our faith, but you renewed them in light of the cosmological knowing and those last questions you left us with. What did you do when you knew? What did you do when you knew? Just hit so deeply into my soul, and I hope everyone's soul who's listening, because the world is so radically changing so quickly. Not that we want to be hyperactive about it. In fact, we're called to be mute and silent and to stop in this maelstrom and to recognize the relationalities, the entanglements, like Ilya Delio speaks of, the entangled God, the entangled universe, that it's all one, and it's calling us to that. Did you know? And then what did you do when you knew? So thanks so much for waking me up a little more today. We're a little more awoke now, each of us, and grateful to you. You're masterful putting a story together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claire.
Sister Pat Reynolds, I see your hand. Can you
How do I
unmute
mute
yourself?
Pat?
Yeah, she's trying. Okay. Okay, Pat,
Bottom left of your screen. You got it, Pat.
you got it.
No, when you said about the incarnation beginning with the Big Bang, that was mind blowing. I need a lot more time with it, but that was beautiful.
Mm. Thank you. I think
I love Advent. It's a liturgical season. It's always been my favorite, but lately I've been reflecting exactly what you were saying, Pat, is how a lot of what we hear around Advent is that all of those billions of years before Christmas were devoid of God. And yeah, and those Advent images of darkness and exile and all of that. And how that's not true. The universe was pervaded by God from its very first moment of existence. God never went anywhere. Very often we go somewhere else. It's been giving me some thoughts about Advent, that we were never in a time of separation, except in our illusions. We were never in a time of exile, except in our illusions.
And Terry, I thought your images and pictures captured so much. So thank you. So for many years, many of us have really said, yes, we are of Earth. We don't come, we're not born into this world. We're, of Earth. And I think that's the first time I've seen that, that stone sculpture, which really captured it. And again, as I said to you, earlier on the other retreat you gave, a beautiful explanation of the Trinity, that icon. So I will certainly pray over that again and more. Margaret? Yeah, you have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
I just was reminded of Michael Moore he used to rail against that phrase from the Hail Holy Queen the veil of tears, you know, when we are in such a cosmic revelation of God, and all we can call it is a veil of tears, you know. That just stayed with me.
Thank you. Mary Ann, yes, Mary Ann Gristo.
I was thinking when you were talking about Christ has a cosmic body that extends throughout the
Mhm.
universe. I thought of the song, "Were You There When They Crucified My Lord?" It's the same idea of when you knew, what did you do?
Mm. Mm.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Probably many of you have seen that beautiful or heart-wrenching image of Mary Southard, the Sister of St. Joseph artist, who does such beautiful things. But she has that beautiful Earth from space image that we all love so much, and it's surrounded by the crown of thorns. So we are in the Gethsemane of Earth at the moment. And so often, like the disciples, were asleep.
So any last thoughts before we conclude?
Thank you.
I do.
Yes. Joan,
Mm.
yes.
I'm still thinking about I guess it's an icon at the cathedral where, Father, you said that Jesus looks mad. And I couldn't help thinking, well, he deserves to look mad. I mean, I was, maybe I was saying to myself, I wish I could get mad. Maybe I would do something. I would do something more than I'm doing. Sometimes I seem very resigned to what's happening to this earth.
Would that image were you, I would be okay with that. If you ever heard a preacher say, Jesus is furious over the presidents of multinational corporations and predatory banks and polluters. But that image is never used to inspire fear in the people who can contribute to build the cathedral. It's used to inspire fear in, when we were 6 and took a cookie out of the cookie jar, or had an impure thought, or things like that.
Yeah.
I read a great Irish woman, founder of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace, Margaret Anna Cusack, said along the same line, we've had enough preachers talking about the blessedness of the poor. We need some who say, woe to you, rich. That other beatitude or malediction. So how we use the anger of God, how the church uses that idea of the wrath of God. It's been so often to oppress the already oppressed and not to afflict the comfortable. But I certainly see what you're getting at, John.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Terry, you've given us a lot to reflect on, and I'm so glad this is being recorded, and I know I'll probably go back to it. I think.
And if you want to share the PowerPoint with the people, you can as well.
Okay,
be great.
great. And I realized I didn't put my email address on. I will in a second on the chat, but I just wanted to say that the Sisters of Charity of St. Elizabeth and Sisters of Charity of New York are preparing for their assembly. We'll be having our assembly in April 2023. And I just think this is a great preparation for us as we think about how are we being called to live the charism of charity into this 21st century and being called into the future. So I just really thank you for this part 1, session 1 of the Company of Charity in the Community of Earth. And hopefully you'll join us. And if you can't, we'll have the recording. But January 5th at the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern time, that title will be Coming Home to Our Bodies, Coming Home to the Land. So Terry will will lead us in the presentation and reflection. So we look forward to that. So I will, let me just put again, see, because some of you, I don't have your emails, but I will be emailing Terry. And what Terry can do is pass it on to the ecological, the ecological spirituality group that you have. Because I think some of the people that might be on the call are from there, but it's CDE. Okay, I'll send it in a minute so you can at least see it before we stop. So that's my email address. So anything else before we give our final thank you?
Thank you, Terry.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much.
Both of
Thanks
you.
so much, Terry.
It was
Thank
very
you.
inspiring.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Great.
Thanks.
lots.
And thank you, Gladys, for interpreting so our brothers and sisters in Guatemala and other places. And speak
I hope I
Spanish.
didn't go too fast for you. I talk like a house on fire, but
Thank you. So we'll stop
Thank
the
you.
recording, I guess. Let me stop.
Yes.
Good.
okay, thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Merry
Thank you.
Christmas.
Merry
Yes,
Christmas.
Merry
And thank you, Gladys. And Terry, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And Gladys, thank you so very
Thank you.
much.
Carol, thank you for letting me know about this.
Oh, good. We'll make sure you get the others. Yes. Thank
Yes,
you,
I wrote it
everyone.
down.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you.
Okay, good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.